All right, so E.T., Steven Spielberg. I didn't see this movie until 2024. I don't know why I didn't watch it as a kid, but I think if I had, 6-year-old me would have loved it. It was smaller than I thought it was going to be. And what I mean by that is I was expecting more action. I think I was expecting the Goonies
Yeah.
with an alien.
Yeah. I'm older than you, so when I saw this for the first time, I saw it as one of those sneak previews. I don't know if they do those things anymore, but back in the day when Spielberg or Lucas or any significant filmmaker had a new movie coming out, they would sneak it like the Wednesday before a Friday opening. And sometimes, as was the case with E.T. when I saw it, they would advertise in the newspapers that it was a sneak
Right,
preview, which
yeah.
the house was packed because of Spielberg had such a reputation by that point. He had done Jaws, he had done Close Encounters, and he had just had a big hit with Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I have to admit, when I saw what E.T. was about, I wondered, what was this? I mean, I thought we already covered this with Close
Yeah.
Encounters. And as I was waiting in line to get into the theater, I heard people saying that this was like a sequel to Close Encounters, but it certainly didn't give that vibe from what little you could see in the advertising. And I have to admit, it was a tremendous relief to see that it was a much smaller thing than Close Encounters. The beginning of the film is particularly small in scope. Close Encounters, if you remember, that the first time we see, one of the first times we see a spaceship in Close Encounters, it's like this country road. And they actually built that. That was like an enormous
Yeah.
set that they built. In this, they're using sets as well for a lot of the stuff, but it's much smaller. And it was a relief for me to see that because I really felt that the big problem with Close Encounters, even though that was a film I loved and I saw it over and over again, I really felt that Close Encounters was a sort of film that was trying to impress you with spectacle. And I was hoping that this time you would be emotionally involved, and that's exactly what it turned out to be.
Right, yeah.
Because the whole thing is told in such a way so as to engage your emotions. Just to give a little sketch of the story, it's about an alien creature that is accidentally left behind as they're gathering little botanical samples on Earth. He's left behind, a spaceship takes off without him, and then eventually he finds his way to Elliot's house. Elliot is a little boy who's living with his mother, who is separated from his father, and his brother and his little sister. The whole film is really the story of him hiding the creature from his mother and eventually hiding the creature from the authorities because there's like government agents that are out looking for it. Who's the guys from South Park?
Trey Parker or Matt
Ray
Stone.
Parker, Matt Stone, right? They have this description that somebody put a video up about them talking about this, how they can't use stories that have and then between the plot points. So if you say so and so did this, and then they did this, and then they did that, you
Right.
don't really have a story. What you need is a story where you say so and so did this, but this happened, therefore this happened. Now you have a story, right?
Right.
Therefore and but make the story engaging to the audience. It creates suspense and the audience's attention will be held. Close Encounters, as much as I love it, I have to recognize it's a and then story.
Oh, yeah.
This thing happens, and then this thing happens, and then this thing happens, and at the very end, everything is sort of brought together. But he's really trying to brute force to impress us. He doesn't really have a good, strong story there. It's all over the place. And even the fact that he shoots some of the alien visitations as horror scenes, where we think that these aliens are going to be a menace to the people, and then at the very end we're supposed to accept it as a sort of wonderful thing,
Oh, yeah.
So Spielberg didn't seem to really be in control of those different elements. He didn't know if it was supposed to be a horror film and the aliens were going to be scary, or if it was supposed to be, heartwarming.
Right.
Uh, in E.T., it's a therefore story. It isn't just a collection of well-directed, visually impressive scenes that have been pushed together. It is actually a story where you can see what's at stake for everybody. You understand the people, you understand why they do what they do, and you understand what's at stake ultimately. So as much as I love Close Encounters, I think it was E.T. where Spielberg really got it right. When I saw that screening, of course, everybody loved it, and it was clear this was going to be a big hit. And I didn't realize that I happened to be working for a theater chain. Later in the year, we got E.T. When it finished running in the first run theaters, it moved over to our theater. And it ran seemingly forever. I mean, it ran so long that they used to use these foam core marquee signs.
Right.
The foam core just started to fall apart. It was just decayed right off the marquee. So it was up forever, and I still remember, even many months into the run of the film, that you would have people. We would always be getting crowds, and people would come out, wiping their eyes. They were so touched by the ending.
Now, I was surprised by the beginning of them starting the story off with E.T. and not introducing the kids first.
If it was the other way around, then it would seem like this filmmaker was trying to keep us guessing whether this is a fantasy that Elliot is having or if it's real.
All right.
By showing us right at the beginning with our own eyes, we see that the alien, even before Elliot and his family have come into the picture, we see them and we see the government agents. So we know that's an ongoing thing, right? The government agents look like they're doing this almost as a routine, although we don't see the faces of any of the adults except the mother.
All right. All we see is like Peter Cody's keys, which, gives him away later.
Right, right. That becomes the way of identifying that one character who becomes important later. But the fact that the ETs recognize that these guys are coming and their hot lights light up and they go back on their ship and they all take off, except for the title character of the film,
Yeah.
that sort of suggests that this is something that they're used to. They got their eyes out or their sensors out for these guys when they approach, and they take off when they do. It's also kind of a little bit of a character touch that AT is so busy looking at the plants and looking at the horizon. He sees all of, I don't know what part of California that
Yeah,
is,
I'm sure.
but he sees all the sparkling lights of the city down below, or the town down below, and he's so dazzled by that, so curious about it that he forgets to get back on the ship. So that tells us about the character. The character is kind of a combination of different elements. And this is probably one of the reasons why the film isn't franchisable. His characteristics change according to the needs of the story. Sometimes he's sort of like a reckless child or a reckless infant.
Yeah.
And sometimes he's the wise elder. And that's even represented in the face. Spielberg had the face sculpted so that it would have the features of somebody like Einstein, but it also had features that resembled an infant. So it's a combination of the infantile and the elderly. But really, E.T. is not the main focus of the story. The main focus of the
Right.
story is the kid. This is Spielberg, talking about his own childhood.
I know he mentioned, I guess his parents were divorced, so he kind of worked that into the story.
I suppose you could say at the beginning he's an outsider. He's a lonely outsider whose father has abandoned him in a sense. And the other kids, his brother and the other circle of kids that he's hanging around with, sort of ignore him or treat him as, that loser,
Yeah.
which is a very common thing, I think, as the younger brother in my family. I recognize that, especially when your brother is older. He doesn't want to be dragging a kid along,
Right.
with
Yeah.
his friends, his age. So Ellie is the socially awkward outsider who can't really impress anybody until he makes friends with a man from outer space.
Yeah.
He's a man from outer space, and we're taking him into a spaceship.
And you see the change in his attitude. At first, he's amazed by the creature, and then he begins to treat it almost like a possession, like he found a great new pet, like he found
Yeah.
a frog or a lizard or something under a rock someplace. And he even says at one point, I'm keeping him,
Yeah.
right? Something, words to that effect. Like, now it's my possession. Uh, and the way Spielberg shoots those scenes with the children, I think, is really what made this film as great as it is. Because I don't really remember any film prior to this that had the sort of comfort with children and the understanding of children that this film has. The way it sort of reminds me almost like Peanuts, the way it recognizes that children are intelligent in their own way and they have their own concerns and they have a sort of structure to their little society
Right.
and that sort of rules that they obey. Like, for instance, the I have absolute power, right? Swearing, getting his brother to swear that he's going to be the one that has absolute power over whatever they do with ET. Those sort of little observations, and also the way that Spielberg uses humor to make the things go down a little more easily, things that would otherwise have been rather implausible. And in a way, he's sort of demonstrating how he's doing this in that one scene where Elliot has just shown his brother and sister the alien. And Elliot is trying to make sure that the little sister, who's the most likely one to say something,
Yeah.
he's trying to convince her, to keep her mouth shut. And he says, "Oh, but only little children can see it."
Because grown-ups can't see them. Only little kids can see them. Give me a break.
That got a roar from the audience when I saw it. And it always got laughs all through the run of the film because it was that way of saying, yes, kids aren't stupid. Even a child that age has a brain and it knows when it's being bullshitted, right? So there's a lot of fun. And Annie came out, the movie version of Annie came out the same summer. And that's sort of like an old-fashioned way of showing kids, right?
Right.
It's like an adult perspective on how children are. This is like a child's perspective on how children are. And that's probably because Spielberg managed to keep, this is a cliche now, but he managed to keep that child in himself alive so he can relate to these kids and he can speak their language and he knows what they find funny and what they consider important. And it's not from, by excluding the adults, there's another thing that's similar to Peanuts. Because in the Peanuts world, you never see adults,
No.
right? Even in the cartoons, the most you hear is like the wop, 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 wop voice. You never hear an adult speaking. You never see an adult's face. And that's sort of what he's doing here. And that's very effective because it means the audience has to start thinking of these children as almost as they would an adult. They have to give the same weight to the things that the children think and say and do as they would to an adult character in a film. And that's what makes it so emotionally engaging, I think.
The look that they gave him was kind of treading this line of it could have looked really weird,
Yeah,
but
right.
what they turned out was just
Well,
seemed real and likable, and it wasn't disgusting looking, and
I think Spielberg even said he doesn't want it to be too easy to like
yeah,
the character. And he is sort of grotesque. And I think that E.T.'s appearance is not as important as the way he's used.
yeah,
And they have a whole bunch of different ways, because obviously there was no CGI at that time. They have a whole bunch of different ways in which the creature was brought to life. Sometimes they have Carlo Rambaldi's animatronic, I guess is the way you would describe it, head and neck, which has a range of expressions. Sometimes they have people in suits, little people, and I think they also use some folks that were amputees. Uh, and they also have scenes where there's a combination of things, like sometimes it's people in suits, but they're wearing sort of a modified version of the mechanical head that Carlo Rambaldi came up with. Sometimes they have the mechanical head and they have a mime with gloves on
yeah,
that are
doing the
doing.
hand, yeah,
But again, it's the humor, the touches of humor and wit that make it work. Like, for instance, There's a moment there where the kids are all gathered around the table, and E.T. is looking at a book which has like, I guess, pictures of the universe and whatnot, and he's eating something. And at one point, he sort of like is taking, the hand comes
Oh,
up,
it
it's
was the watermelon,
like
yeah.
a watermelon, right? He's taking
Yeah.
a seed or something out of it. Those are the little touches that bring it to life. Because the same animatronics and the same wouldn't be impressive at all if it didn't have that sort of artistry, that sort of
Yeah.
awareness, that brings it to life. Also, the scene where he's sitting reading and he glances over and sees that the flowers have died, and he just sort of, and the flowers brought back to life. And then he just sort of goes back to reading again.
Yeah, yeah.
It's recognizably human, which is what it has to be in order for us to care about it. We are used to seeing, in films like Star Wars, for instance, there are friendly aliens, but they're all slightly,
Yeah.
you have to wonder how far you could push Chewbacca, for instance. He might
Yeah.
be lovable when he's in a good mood, but he could also tear your arm off,
Right, yeah.
as the famous line says. And that's really been true throughout the history of science fiction films in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Whereas E.T. is really completely, there's no fear that you feel when you see E.T. And you're never afraid, which might have been a temptation, actually. I can imagine it might have occurred to people to say, let's have a moment where the audience maybe isn't certain that the children are safe with this creature.
Right.
You never have a moment like that. You always feel that the creature is probably more afraid of the kids at a certain point than they should be of him. And the fact that the children really aren't afraid of E.T. is also sort of heartwarming. That the fact that human beings at a certain point in their life embrace the other, right? And it's only later in their lives that they learn to reject anything alien or it would be afraid of anything alien. Now, I say all of that, but the other thing that we have to talk about is what E.T. came from. And what it came from was a horror story, actually. Originally, Columbia wanted Spielberg to do a sequel to Close Encounters. And he started developing something under the title Close Encounters 2 or something like that. And then eventually he got John Sayles involved. John Sayles is considered a very significant, important director in his own right. But he also wrote the screenplays for Piranha, which was I think Roger Corman produced.
Roger Corman, yeah.
Ripoff and that was one of the few ripoffs of Jaws that Spielberg really liked. So Sayles wrote a script called Night Skies, which is actually available on the web for anybody who's interested in reading it. And it was a horror story. It was based on a supposedly true incident of aliens, a crowd of aliens that come down and terrorize this family. And Spielberg apparently was committed to this idea to the extent that he had a full screenplay written. It was in development at Columbia. Columbia apparently spent about $10 million developing it, if I don't have that figure wrong. It might be a little much. Maybe it was just $1 million.
Yeah.
And he had Rick Baker set up in a studio while he was apparently doing American Werewolf in London. He was also working on Night Skies. Apparently the idea of Night Skies was there's like 5 aliens. Most of them are kind of mean, but one of them is nice. And the nice one apparently develops a relationship or a friendship with an autistic child that is part of this family that they're terrorizing. So at a certain point, Spielberg had a sort of epiphany. He had a moment of clarity while he was working on Raiders of the Lost Ark, actually. And he said, I don't want to do a story about aliens coming all that distance just to terrorize a family.
Yeah.
I don't think really Spielberg had it in him to do horror movies anyway. With the exception of Jaws, which is only, really more of a monster story than an adventure story, more than a horror story. But he's never been big on horror, real horror. So anyway, the Night Skies project was scuttled. Spielberg told Sayles, thank you very much. I'm not going to do this. Sayles didn't seem to mind, I guess because he got paid anyway.
Yeah.
But apparently there was a great deal of animosity between Rick Baker and Spielberg because Rick Baker had developed the designs to a certain point and he was very happy with the stuff. And apparently there was some disagreement as to whether or not he could do E.T., because Spielberg offered it to him. He said, I'm not going to do Night Skies, I'm going to do E.T., so I wanted
Yeah,
to
I
have
think.
just one.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. Is he just wanted the one alien? Rick
Right.
Baker had already made all the other ones, and he said they came to a mutual disagreement. But
I mean, all of this stuff we're getting secondhand from different places.
yeah,
But at a certain point, it got so acrimonious that Spielberg actually locked him and his team out of the studio that they were using and confiscated all the stuff that they had developed. And to add insult to injury, sometime later, Time magazine had an interview with Carlo Rambaldi, and he said that the team that had been working previously on it had to be fired because they were incompetent and they spent a whole lot of money and didn't develop anything, which pissed Rick Baker off. Also, he recognized that some of the stuff that he had done ended up in the final design of E.T.
yeah,
And then to make matters even worse, and this is skipping way ahead, the Writers Guild eventually came in and said that because Melissa Matheson, who was the screenwriter, we'll get to her, because she had described E.T. in her script, she was entitled to a percentage of the merchandise profits. Rick Baker never got any of that.
yeah,
So anyway, Rick Baker would eventually go on and work on some projects that Spielberg headed up, but only as a producer. He never worked on any projects that Spielberg was the director of. So it's kind of unfortunate that there was that
yeah.
tension. I think also probably if I were Rick Baker, I would be kind of disappointed that the one opportunity to work on a movie like E.T., which became, just an enormous success, that he, because of some sort of misunderstanding, he wasn't able to do that.
Early development of a picture, you got to figure things are going to change, and
Yeah.
you got to kind of accept the fact that okay, you just want one alien now. Let me do that for you, even though
Yeah.
I've already built five.
Well, I think he claimed that that would be a problem because he was also working on American Werewolf in London.
Yeah,
So he couldn't do both. He couldn't start from scratch on a new project while also working. This is what I guess he would say, and I suppose there's some logic to that. Spielberg seems like a genuinely nice guy,
yeah,
but as a businessman, he may sometimes create, just as George Lucas does, create a certain mythology about why he does things. Right. Like, for instance, we hear that Sid Sheinberg, who was the head of MCA Universal, he had had Spielberg under contract for years. Uh, Spielberg started with Universal doing their TV shows. He did the Night Gallery pilot part of it. He did Columbo, first episode of Columbo. He did a TV movie with Darren McGavin. What else did he do? He did Duel, which was a TV
yeah.
movie. Yeah. And he did Triple Iron Express, which was his first feature for Universal, if I'm not mistaken. And then, of course, he did Jaws, which was Universal's biggest hit of all time. For whatever reason, Universal didn't do Close Encounters. But Spielberg was apparently under, at least he claims, he was under some sort of contract with Universal where he had to provide them with a certain number of films. He did Columbia's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That was a big hit. They wanted a sequel. He started developing Night Skies. At first, he wasn't going to direct it, I gather. He was just going to be the producer. Then, when he decided to turn it into E.T., and he decided, now I'm going to direct, he was obligated to take that to Universal because that would have been one of the films that he owed them.
Yeah.
The other story, the alternate story, is that Columbia had a team of, what would we call it, the folks that research audience reaction to things, market research,
Marketing.
right?
Yeah.
They supposedly determined that adult audiences wouldn't be interested in it. This was something like, I forget the term they use, wimpy Disney film that wouldn't be successful. So it was Columbia that put the film in turnaround, and then Spielberg took it to Sid Sheinberg and asked him to buy Columbia out. That sounds to me like a slightly more likely story, to be honest. Sid Sheinberg gives them $1 million, and he gives them 5% of the profits. And the head of Columbia later claimed that they made more from E.T., even though they didn't produce it, than their own films that year. Parts of Night Skies did end up in E.T., and parts of Night Skies also ended up in Poltergeist and Gremlins.
Yeah.
So maybe that was the reason why Spielberg wanted to make sure that they got paid off so they wouldn't be chasing after him and saying, oh, we're going to sue you for this one, we're going to sue you for that one. He got to walk away with the rights to use that script any way he wanted or not to use it. I guess, if he chose to. Melissa Matheson had written one previous screenplay. She visited Harrison Ford, who was her boyfriend at the time. When they were shooting, him and Spielberg was shooting Raiders in Tunisia. And Spielberg got into a conversation with her about Night Skies, and he let her read the script. And apparently the only thing that she was touched by or impressed by was the part about the autistic boy being befriended by this alien. That is part of the Night Sky script. So they started to talk, and then Spielberg, I guess, brought his own childhood into the story, and they started to build a new story. And she took those story ideas off and wrote that script in a fairly limited period of time. And I think it only went two drafts, if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
Maybe one other writer that added some additional material, but he said at the time that this was the best first draft of a script that he had ever read.
Yeah.
He went to Kathleen Kennedy, who's a famous name now, because she's the head of Lucasfilms for Disney. And Spielberg apparently came to her and said, "We could shoot this right now. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to. We don't even have to do any more work on it. We can go ahead and shoot." Spielberg storyboarded it. He apparently did like 40% of the script in storyboard form, and then he discarded them because he decided that a more improvisational, looser feel to the shoot would better suit the actors, that to take advantage of the things that the kids were coming up with, you needed a looser thing, and to try to force them into certain compositions based on the storyboard would be inhibiting and restrictive to the child actors.
Right.
He also shot it more or less in chronological order, as opposed to shooting the stuff out of sequence, because he was dealing with children and he wanted to get really emotional performances from them. So shooting it in sequence allowed the kids to almost feel like they were experiencing this story
Right, yeah.
as if it was actually happening. When you see the audition tape for Henry Thomas, you can't imagine that it's very hard for him to be emotional, because his audition tape is enough to make you weep. And
Oh,
he's
yeah.
so sincere, and so it's heartbreaking. I mean, the audition tape, somebody off camera saying that I'm here to take your dog away.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't take it. But what's impressive about it is that all of the child actors feel completely genuine. They don't seem like they're acting. And usually with child actors, you get the impression that the children really don't understand the meaning of the things they're saying, that it's just
Right,
something
yeah.
that they're repeating because they've memorized it. Here you really feel like the kids are saying things that they really are thinking, in the moment.
Yeah, I remember
And
on that on his audition tape at the end, you can hear Spielberg say, "You got the part,
you
kid."
get the part, right?
Yeah.
The ability to create that world is more dependent on the child actors than on the animatronics or any of that
Right,
stuff,
yeah.
because their reactions to the creature are what makes it seem like it's real. And I love also the way, perhaps because of the ad-libbing, he gets spontaneous, real reactions, even from the adult actors like Dee Wallace. This was like I think the third film that Dee Wallace had done. She'd done The Hills Have Eyes, and she did The Howling.
The Howling, yeah, yeah.
So two horror movies before that. And Howling was quite a good film. But there's a moment there where they're all around the table, and Elliot gets angry at his brother, and he calls him penis breath.
Yeah.
And she laughs before she admonishes him.
Maybe an elf or a leprechaun.
There's nothing like that, penis breath!
Elliot! Sit down.
Her laughter is apparently a spontaneous reaction of the actor.
Right.
Because I don't think Spielberg told her that the kid was going to say penis. But it was something they came up with in the moment. That's something that Spielberg had been doing all the way back to Jaws. I think we talked about this on our Jaws episode. We talked about how Scheider was interacting with the kid that was playing his son,
Right.
and he saw what the kid was doing, and he got Spielberg to say, maybe you should shoot this.
Yeah.
And that whole interaction at the table in Jaws, when the kid is imitating what his father is doing, that was really something that just happened. And that's true in this case too. They feel like they're spontaneous reactions and spontaneous dialogue, because in some cases they actually were. Drew Barrymore, she says, "I don't like its feet," when she's talking about E.T. That was apparently something that Drew Barrymore came up with on the set. So that adds enormously to it as well, I think. the performance by Dee Wallace is very solid as well, but um, the mother, I guess you could say it's kind of a thankless role because she has to be just absent enough so that those scenes with with E.T. walking around the kitchen
Yeah,
practically
she
underfoot,
doesn't. Yeah,
she
she
doesn't
doesn't
see it,
seem. Yeah,
which is wonderful comedy. I mean, and that's another thing I would say about this film. The comedic bits are just done so well. It's almost like
yeah.
watching the great Hollywood screen comedians.
In the closet, fast.
And how you feel? What happened in here?
Oh, you mean my room?
This is no room. This is an accident.
I was, reorganizing.
I mean, that almost looks like something that you would expect to see in like a screwball comedy from the 40s. But it's very entertaining, very funny. And the fact that the film maintains that comedic tone all the way through without damaging the emotional impact of it is remarkable, you know. Usually you need some sort of real menace or threat to
Yeah,
engage people's emotions. But here, I mean, there's the slight menace from the government agents. But when the film first came out, even when we were seeing it fresh, nobody really thought that the government agents were going to do anything that terrible, right?
right. Yeah,
And the way he times the eventual intrusion of the government agents into the house was perfect. When the mother is finally introduced to E.T., he's sick, he's dying, and the brother brings the mother in, you got to see this.
yeah,
And he brings her in, and at first she goes, "Oh, guys, that's great!" Like the kids are pulling some sort of magic trick or something.
right.
With that moment, he manages to get around that problem that all stories like this have, is would a person think if they saw that, would they assume that it's real or would they think they're being tricked in some way? Would they
Right.
say,
Yeah,
"Oh, that's just a puppet. That's a very nice puppet you got there," you know? Uh, that would be the reaction of a lot of people. So that is for her to first react that way makes that scene work, makes it more convincing. At first she says, "That's great, guys," like they're doing a magic trick. And then when she looks a little closer and she realizes it's real, then she's aghast. You know, she wants to
right.
pull
Yeah,
the kids away from because she figures it's a threat. And at that moment, the movie could have become tedious because then it could have became the kids trying to convince mom that ET is not a threat, and that would be tedious because the audience already knows that ET is not a threat to them.
yeah.
But as she's taking the kids out of the house to get away from this perceived threat, right away they run into the government agents. They come in, and now we have a whole different story. Right? The whole thing's been changed now.
Right.
And that really is perfect structure, right? As soon as a strand of the story starts to get kind of tedious, change it up. Have something happen that will push it into a different realm.
And my only question is, why are they in NASA spacesuits? Because that was
It,
just that was one thing that made me also think this is in Elliot's making this up because that's how he would imagine, government agencies in like a spacesuit. You know what I'm saying? Not.
well, there are some people who do speculate that this whole thing is just a fantasy in Eliot's mind.
Yeah.
It's obviously we have to accept the filmmaker doesn't want us to believe that. And
Right.
the movie has a beginning, middle, and end, and there's never no moment where he says, what a horrible dream I had," or "What a wonderful dream I had." But I will say this: this is a fantasy that a child Elliot's age could have, and a story that a child his age would really enjoy and appreciate and understand. So in a sense, it is a fantasy of Eliot's. It's the fantasy of a child that age, or a mentality that can understand or appreciate a child that age.
Right.
What would a kid of Eliot's age, given his circumstances, given the fact that he is the sort of lonely outsider, what sort of story would he make up that would make him happy, right? And the
Right.
story that he would make up would not only be how do I get absolute power, which is a famous line from the movie. They keep, that's the oath that they all keep asking their, Elliot asks his brother to swear that he has absolute power, that Elliot has absolute power. Uh, and that is part of the quest for Elliot. He wants to have power. He wants to be an important person. He wants to be in control. But the other thing he wants is a surrogate for his father, for his missing father. He wants
Right,
a
yeah.
friend or someone. I mean, it's an interesting thing because in a way, Elliot is protecting the alien. But on the other hand, Elliot is being protected by E.T., right?
Right.
E.T. heals them with his little glowing finger. E.T. lifts them all up when things look bad and they look like they're going to be stopped by the guys with the guns. E.T. lifts the whole crowd up and they go sailing through the sky, right? So again, E.T.'s powers seem to develop as
Yeah.
they're needed in the
Yeah.
story. But I don't mind that because, as you say, it is a story that has a sort of childlike
Yeah. I
mentality.
mean, I don't think 6-year-old me would have questioned the NASA suit.
There's something kind of cool about
Yeah, yeah.
a spacesuit in a home, pushing the curtains aside and coming into
Yeah.
your living room. So I think he did that probably for the imagery more than anything else.
You're right.
And also those other things, those big accordion tunnels,
Mm-hmm.
plastic tunnels that they run to the doors of the house, and they cover the whole house in
Right.
plastic. Apparently, Spielberg saw those being used, the accordion tunnels, at an airport. And he said, "Oh, that looks good. I got to use that." And of course,
Yeah.
it's an example of a clever director who uses all the stuff that he sees and can immediately imagine, I can do a bit with that, right? We can have that
Yeah.
attached to the back of the truck, and the truck is driving away, and then we can have a moment of suspense, plucking the plugs out so to release
To
the
release it,
accordion
yeah.
thing. And that's a wonderfully entertaining and exciting moment. So everything is there for a purpose, but it's all emotion and visuals. It's not
Right.
intellect or backstory or exposition. None of that is necessary because it's all done in these sort of universal symbols, almost the way they used to tell stories in the silent era, right? Everything had to be reduced to something simple because you didn't want to have a lot of intertitles to explain everything.
Yeah.
So alien, government agents, we don't need any explanation. We know as soon as we see them, the audience understands immediately, oh, I know what they're going for here. I know
Yeah.
what these guys. And also, of course, in a way, Spielberg was echoing stuff that he had already done in Close Encounters. So all of these things can be understood by the audience on sight, and then you have the potential to build on them. Spielberg said this. He said it was the first time he allowed himself to be seen, his own feelings, his own attitudes about things, and a little bit of his own life story coming through. Whereas in the other films he had done, Jaws and Close Encounters and Raiders, he was really just doing very clever parodies or homages to Hollywood movies that he liked
Right.
as a kid. If you saw The Fabelmans, you know that the thing that got him into doing movies in the first place was seeing The Greatest Show on Earth, which I think was Cecil B. DeMille, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so, yeah.
And that has a big train wreck scene in it, where a train goes off the tracks and the cars are flying all over the place. And Spielberg was so impressed by that it got him as a child interested in being a filmmaker. And he got a little camera and he got a train set and he tried to recreate that scene. So Spielberg was used to, and maybe this is true of George Lucas as well, he was used to imitating Hollywood films that he liked. Close Encounters, you sort of feel like it's David Lean making a science fiction movie, an
Right.
alien invasion movie. But with E.T., it really is much more of a personal film. This is Spielberg. He's
Yeah.
almost the star of this movie, even though he never appears on screen, because so much of his sensibility is visible in this, now that we know him as well as we do, having seen his movies now, going back to the mid-1970s, there's this impression that a lot of people have that this film isn't as popular or as well regarded now as it once was. I'm not sure if that's really true. It's just that nowadays, one of the things that's so important is franchising.
Yeah.
Everything has to be franchised. And when people talk about the latest, whatever it is, superhero movie or science fiction epic, almost the first thing that they say when they're reviewing it is, I can see where this is going to make a great sequel.
Yeah.
It could be a series of films here. And I guess they make the decision when the studio heads are talking about what films to greenlight. Nowadays, the ability to turn something into a series of films is
Yeah.
essential. E.T. can't be turned into a series.
No.
And bravo for Spielberg. I know he briefly considered doing a sequel with Melissa Matheson, but they both realized that, they couldn't possibly do it without damaging the respect and affection that people had for the first film.
Right. I mean, I just start thinking, like, what would you do? Because I don't really want to see a story that takes place on E.T.'s home planet.
Right.
And I don't want to see him come back or another one come back and interact with other kids. I just don't want to. It doesn't need to be done.
This should be like Peanuts, or it should be like The Simpsons, in that it should always be a world where this is the story and these people are a certain age and that's it.
Yeah.
So we can always go back and revisit this, and we can always go back to being like children again. Whereas to update it or to follow the story as they get older, as you say, what story could you possibly have that would mean anything? But also, we really don't want to see Elliot as a retiree.
Right.
That's not, that's just not the vibe we're going for here. This is not that type of story. The other thing is that E.T., as I mentioned, is only developed enough to work in this story. And if you start sticking other attributes on him in order to be able to tell another story, he loses his charm.
Yeah.
Part of it is the part of the pleasure of this movie is sort of discovering E.T. and discovering all the additional powers he has, and slowly seeing that he's a lot smarter than he might have initially seemed.
Right.
But when they wrote the book, and they got fairly famous writer, William Kotzwinkle, I think his name is. He's a guy that is pretty well respected. He wrote the novelization of E.T. And there's details in it about he's 1,000,000 years old or something like that. It's a ridiculous thing. Say, how does this in any way
Yeah.
help us? Yeah.
Yeah, I was glad there wasn't a scene of scientists sitting around going, we know where he's from, and they're this kind of, with them know all this stuff. I'm like, well, we don't care.
Right. We don't care.
Yeah, I
And
don't. I don't need to know all that.
And in the film, they're doing their examination of him, and they studying his blood and everything, and they all come, he has DNA,
Yeah.
And it's funny to the audience because there's this really emotional story going on that they're completely missing because they're just focused on this an important thing, I imagine,
Yeah.
for scientists. But if that was actually happening, if that were a true story, the real story would be the emotional attachment between an alien being and a human being.
All right.
That's the stuff that we should care about, right? Because it isn't necessarily, we can't take it for granted that that's the way things are going to go if we do encounter alien beings.
What brought him back to life? I didn't really understand. It was almost like he has to come back to life so we can end the movie. So we're just going to have him magically just come back to life. Or was he faking it the whole time?
Well, I suppose that's a possibility, but here's another possibility. Yeah. His ability to live, the life force, has to be connected to his fellow aliens. When they're so far away that he doesn't have a hot light anymore, then he expires. And when they are returning, now they're close enough so that his hot light can start powering him again. He comes back to life. That would be my explanation. If I was forced at gunpoint to give an explanation.
To explain it.
But I wouldn't be forced at gunpoint because Spielberg would have the guns CGI
take that out. Which I had a question about, because the version I watched, I don't know whether some scenes where they had radios, because some scenes had radios, some scenes they had guns.
We should explain, Spielberg for a re-release of the movie, he decided that because CGI was possible now, he was going to ask his special effects artists to remove all the rifles, the long guns that you see being held by the government agents in the film,
Right.
and replace them with walkie-talkies. And they did that. And they also added a fair amount of CGI to the creature effects in the film, if I understand correctly. I never saw it. I didn't want to see
Right.
it. Spielberg was criticized for that, I think rightly so.
Yeah.
And he, to his credit, realized he had made a mistake. So the next time they put it out, it was the original version with the guns. So if you saw a version with guns, then you saw the original version. And he realized that films are a thing of their time, and you shouldn't try to go and impose attitudes from a later time onto a film from 1982. So kudos to him for being smart enough to realize that he shouldn't destroy his film just to appease some critics. And to be honest with you, I never heard anybody complain about the guns in E.T. That wasn't really a big issue. You know? All it does by taking the guns out is it takes away the one little hint of menace that makes the thing, work. Those scenes, at least those action scenes, you really do have to feel that there's something at stake, right? I think everybody understood the tone of this film. And it would have been as likely for Leatherface to show up at the end as somebody firing shots at children. But it does add that little bit of menace or suspense. And it also gives a reason for E.T. to lift them all up to save them.
Yeah.
So it works on that level as well.
Yeah, that was a great action scene, which is, the chase scene. I thought it was really good.
And the music, of course, makes a big difference as well. The John Williams score for this is just fantastic.
Oh, yeah. One scene that actually surprised me seeing it, as an adult, was when the brother just, finds E.T. laying in the creek, and I was like shocked by it, the way he looked.
With the raccoon getting ready to eat him.
Yeah, and but I really felt like, I really felt for him, all white looking, and
Well, I mean, that's the key, right? If you can do stuff like that in such a way that the audience really feels when they see it, it's, oh my God, he's dead, E.T.'s dead.
Yeah. I can't believe they're going to kill him,
The fact that we feel that way is proof that Spielberg knew what he was doing there. The little touches matter. The little things like adding the raccoon,
Yeah.
Because who knows, if you just laid that rubber thing out in the creek and you didn't have the raccoon, maybe you wouldn't have been as convincing. Maybe we needed something living in that shot to make the whole scene work. You mentioned the fact that we never see the faces of the adults. We don't see the face of the science class teacher. There's a wonderful sequence where Elliot is at school, E.T. is at home, and he's sort of going through the house and making a mess of things. That's the scene where Spielberg somehow manages to put over this idea, which would have been very hard if he wasn't such a talented director, that Elliot and E.T. are connected emotionally. Nobody ever says that. Nobody ever says, oh, yes, they have some sort of telepathic connection. He just shows it, right? Elliot, E.T. gets into the refrigerator and he takes a beer and he gog, and Elliot burps. And there's all sorts of stuff like that where we can see the connection. And Elliot eventually sort of goes on a rampage. They're about to dissect frogs, and Elliot sees, I guess, the similarity between the frog and his killing jar and E.T. So he unplugs it and he lets the frog out, and then he runs around letting all the other frogs out.
All the frogs out,
right? And meanwhile, E.T. is at home, and I guess perhaps still feeling the effects of the beer to a certain extent. He's watching The Quiet Man with John Wayne on TV, and there's that moment where John Wayne like pulls, I guess it was Maureen O'Hara. He pulls her towards him, and the wind is blowing, and he gives her a big kiss. And so Elliot does the same. There's a girl that he's attracted to, or she's attracted to him, I guess. And he actually has to climb up on some kid that's crawling by,
Yeah.
be high enough to kiss her. And of course,
Yeah.
the final shot is her legs as Elliot is being led off to the principal's office, and her one foot sort of turns in on the other, like she found the whole experience pleasurable.
Yeah.
The principal was supposed to be played by Harrison Ford, and you can find that footage. He actually shot the scene of the principal sort of haranguing Elliot for his misbehavior. And I'm glad they cut that out because
Yeah.
not only is it not really the right role for Harrison Ford, but also it's not a character that we really want to see in this movie. You know,
Yeah.
he talks too much, and we don't want to hear
Right.
anybody talking that much in this movie. We want the kids to talk. One of the reasons why perhaps the film isn't held in as high regard now is because there was so much merchandising that people just got sick of it, you know.
Yeah.
So now when we look back on, a lot of people look back and they remember the mania rather than the film itself. So I can imagine that probably damaged a lot of people's feeling of the film, especially people that didn't actually see the film.
Right. Yeah.
They might have said, oh, this ET stuff, it's all about breakfast cereal and,
Yeah.
you know, Reese's Pieces and all this bullshit. Who cares? But I would imagine another reason why it's not in favor as much is because it's very hard to watch this movie too often.
Right.
It becomes emotionally exhausting at a certain point, or if your emotions turn off at a certain point, it's like hearing the same joke over and over again. It stops
Yeah.
being funny. It's so based on emotion that you would be a wreck if you watched it many times. Well, I guess it's good. You waited, you held out, and you had some. It was like a pleasant surprise that it turned out to
Yeah.
be good. And for me, it was a relief. And this has been true of a number of films that we've watched over the past couple of years. Uh, I was so afraid if I went back to this, I would find that I didn't think it was any good.
Yeah.
So it's
All right.
such a relief to see it's such a skillfully made film. You know, everything about it is just, you know, perfect, I think.
So you recommend people watch ET, obviously, right? This is going to be one of our recommendations.
I think so. It's funny that some of the films that we've strongly recommended are things like Rosemary's Baby and The
Yeah.
Exorcist, and Jaws, which are all violent horror films or have adult material in. But this is something that anybody of any age can watch and enjoy.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think that it's a children's movie. I think it's an adult movie that children
Right.
can enjoy as well as adults.
I'm glad I watched it, and I definitely recommend it.
It's a strong recommendation, I think, from both of us. Yeah.